My name is Amber Mitchell, and I'm 24 years old. 3 months ago, I woke up alone in a hospital room, confused and disoriented after being in a coma. Not a single family member had visited me during my entire stay. My parents, who had always claimed to love me, abandoned me when I needed them most, leaving me with mounting medical bills and broken trust. But nothing prepared them for the moment they saw me in court. I'll never forget the look on their faces when they collapsed. Before I begin my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button if you want to hear more stories about finding strength when family fails you. Growing up in suburban Boston, I'd always been close with my parents, Richard and Diana Mitchell. They were well respected in our community, Dad a successful investment banker and Mom a former lawyer turned charity organizer. Our Tudor-style home in Wellesley was the picture of upper-middle-class perfection, with manicured lawns and a two-car garage that housed their matching luxury sedans. From the outside, we were the ideal American family. My childhood was filled with piano lessons, competitive swimming, and academic decathlons. My parents beamed with pride at every award ceremony and parent-teacher conference. Amber has such potential, they'd tell anyone who would listen. And I thrived under their attention, determined to make them proud. When I earned a full academic scholarship to Northeastern University, my parents threw an extravagant graduation party. Our brilliant daughter, my father announced to the crowd of family friends, raising his champagne glass. The next CEO in the making. I remember feeling both embarrassed and deeply validated by his words. College was transformative. I double majored in marketing and psychology, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a job at Crawford & Burke, one of Boston's top marketing firms. By 23, I had my own apartment in Cambridge, a growing investment portfolio, thanks to Dad's financial guidance, and was the youngest junior executive in my company's history. The first signs of change in my relationship with my parents appeared subtly. My younger brother Ryan was accepted to Harvard Medical School, and suddenly my parents' focus shifted dramatically. During our monthly family dinners, the conversation centered almost exclusively on Ryan's studies, his professors, and his bright future as a surgeon. "How's work, honey?" Mom would ask, almost as an afterthought. "Great, actually. I just landed the Sportflex account," I'd respond, eager to share my own success. "That's nice, dear. Did you hear about Ryan's research position? Only 3 first years were selected." And just like that, my achievement became a footnote. I tried not to let it bother me. Ryan had always been the more reserved of us two, and I reasoned that perhaps he needed the encouragement more than I did. But as months passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. At Christmas dinner last year, my father reviewed some investment options with Ryan while my mother showed off the new stethoscope they'd bought him, a $500 Littman cardiology model. "Amber, could you clear the plates?" Mom asked, not even looking in my direction as she admired Ryan's gift. That same night, I introduced them to my boyfriend, Tyler Reynolds. Tyler was handsome, kind, and dedicated to his career as a firefighter with the Boston Fire Department. He had saved for 2 years to buy his modest condo in Somerville and volunteered weekends at a youth center teaching fire safety. He held doors open for me, listened intently when I spoke, and made me laugh until my sides hurt. In short, he was everything I could want in a partner. My parents were coldly polite. "A firefighter?" my father asked later, when Tyler stepped outside to take a call. "Amber, you're an executive. Don't you think you should be dating someone more professionally compatible?" "Dad, Tyler is amazing. He saves lives for a living." "It's a blue-collar job, sweetheart," my mother chimed in. "Think about your future. What about that hedge fund manager you mentioned from your gym? James something?" "Jason," I corrected. "And he's arrogant and self-absorbed. Tyler is the best man I've ever met." My father sighed, swirling his expensive scotch. "You've always been headstrong. Just remember that love doesn't pay the bills." The last dinner I had with my parents before the accident was at an upscale restaurant in Back Bay. Ryan couldn't make it, He was studying for exams, so it was just the three of us. I'd been promoted that week to lead the digital strategy team, which came with a substantial raise and my own office. "That's wonderful," my father said, barely looking up from his filet mignon. "Ryan's professor thinks he might be able to publish his research in the New England Journal of Medicine." I put down my fork. "Did you hear what I said? This is a huge promotion. People work 10 years to reach this position, and I did it in 2. "Of course we heard you, Amber," my mother replied. "It's just that, well, medicine is a more substantial career. Marketing is so trendy." "Trendy?" "I'm helping build multi-million-dollar brands. My salary just jumped to 6 figures." "And that's great for now," my father interjected. "But Ryan is building a career that will last a lifetime. Doctors are always needed." I felt my cheeks flush with anger. "I've worked incredibly hard to get where I am." "No one's saying you haven't, dear," my mother said, patting my hand condescendingly. "Now, about Tyler, are you still seeing him?" The abrupt change of subject only fueled my frustration. "Yes, and things are getting serious. He's talking about us moving in together." My parents exchanged a look I knew all too well, the Amber's making a mistake look. "Don't you think that's rushing things?" my father asked. "You're only 24. I'm an adult, Dad. I know what I'm doing." "We just worry," my mother added. "Firefighting is such a dangerous profession. And the salary, well, it's not what you're accustomed to. I make enough for both of us, though Tyler would never let me support him. He's proud of what he does." "Pride doesn't build retirement accounts," my father muttered. The rest of dinner passed in tense conversation. When we parted outside the restaurant, my mother hugged me stiffly. "Just think about what we've said. We only want what's best for you." I drove home in the pouring rain, tears blurring my vision, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The irony doesn't escape me now, that my last conscious moments before the accident were filled with anger toward the very people whose absence would later break my heart. I never saw the truck that ran the red light. I only remember the sudden glare of headlights, the screech of brakes, and then nothing. The rain was coming down in sheets that night, drumming against my windshield as I navigated the slick Boston streets. Traffic signals reflected in puddles, stretching and warping with each passing car. My mind wasn't on the road, it was replaying the dinner conversation, my parents' dismissiveness, their fixation on Ryan. I was so distracted that I didn't notice the semi-truck barreling toward the intersection until its high beams flooded my car. The impact was catastrophic. According to the police report, the truck driver had fallen asleep at the wheel after working a double shift. His vehicle slammed into the driver's side of my sedan, crushing the metal frame and shattering every window. The airbags deployed, but the force of the collision pushed my car across 2 lanes and into a concrete barrier. First responders had to use the jaws of life to extract me from the wreckage. Tyler was working that night. He later told me he heard the call come in over the dispatch radio: "Serious motor vehicle accident, female victim, approximately 25 years old, unconscious but breathing." He didn't know it was me until his truck arrived at the scene and he recognized what was left of my car. "I saw your red sneaker," he told me months later, his voice breaking. "You always wear those red sneakers. And then I saw your hair through the broken window, and I couldn't breathe." Protocol dictated that he step back and let his colleagues handle the extraction since he knew the victim, but Tyler refused to leave my side. He held my hand through the broken window while the other firefighters worked to free me, talking to me continuously even though I couldn't hear him. "Stay with me, Amber," he kept saying. "Just stay with me." The ambulance rushed me to Boston General Hospital, where a trauma team was waiting. My injuries were extensive: traumatic brain injury, collapsed lung, ruptured spleen, fractured pelvis, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. I was immediately taken into surgery, where doctors worked for 8 hours to save my life. Tyler called my parents from the hospital waiting room, his hands still covered in my blood. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell," he said, his voice raw. There's been an accident. Amber's in surgery. It's very serious. They arrived 3 hours later, by which time I was in the ICU, connected to a ventilator, my head partially shaved and bandaged from the emergency craniotomy surgeons had performed to relieve pressure on my brain. Dr. Rebecca Stevens, the neurologist assigned to my case, met with my parents and Tyler in a small consultation room. She didn't sugarcoat my condition. Amber has suffered a severe traumatic brain injury, she explained. We've induced a coma to give her brain time to heal, but I have to be honest, there's no way to predict when or if she'll regain consciousness. And if she does wake up, she may have significant cognitive impairments. Tyler broke down at this news, but my parents remained stoically composed. Their first questions weren't about my chances of survival or recovery, but about insurance coverage. Our daughter has excellent health insurance through her employer, my father said, his voice businesslike. But what happens if her condition requires long-term care? Will her policy cover that? Dr. Stevens looked taken aback. We're focused on stabilizing Amber right now. Long-term care decisions can be addressed later. We need to understand the financial implications, my mother insisted. We can't make informed decisions without all the facts. Tyler stared at them in disbelief. She might not wake up, and you're worried about money? My father turned to him coldly. Young man, medical care is extremely expensive. It's not unfeeling to be practical. This was the first fracture in what would become a complete breakdown in the relationship between Tyler and my parents. Over the next few days, as I lay unconscious in the ICU, the tension grew. Tyler practically lived at the hospital, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, leaving only to shower and change before his shifts. My parents, meanwhile, made brief, formal visits, spending more time with hospital administrators than at my bedside. One evening, Tyler overheard them speaking with the hospital's financial counselor in the hallway outside my room. Her condition is stable but unchanged, my father was saying. And these daily costs are astronomical. At what point do we need to consider transferring her to a less expensive facility? Richard, my mother cautioned, noticing Tyler approaching. Not now. Tyler confronted them immediately. You want to move her to a cheaper hospital? She needs the specialized care she's getting here. This isn't your concern, my father replied stiffly. You're not family. I love your daughter, Tyler said, his voice rising. I'm here every day. Where are you? 2 hours a day, max, and half of that time you're on your phones or talking to administrators. We have responsibilities, my mother said defensively. Ryan needs our support with his exams, and we have to manage Amber's affairs while she's indisposed. Indisposed? Tyler echoed incredulously. She's fighting for her life. The confrontation ended with my father suggesting that Tyler was overstepping his boundaries. When Amber wakes up, she'll understand that we were acting in her best interest. Until then, we'll handle her medical and financial decisions as her legal next of kin. That was the last meaningful interaction Tyler had with my parents. The next day, they visited briefly in the morning. My father took some photos of my medical charts with his phone, and my mother placed a small vase of flowers on the windowsill, not close enough for me to see had I been conscious. They didn't touch me, didn't speak to me. Then they left, and Tyler never saw them at the hospital again. As days turned into weeks, my condition stabilized, but I remained comatose. Tyler continued his vigil, reading to me, playing my favorite music, and talking about our future together. The nurses grew fond of him, bringing him coffee and occasionally smuggling in decent food from outside the hospital. He's here more than some of our staff, one nurse, Sophia Carter, commented. Where are her parents? Tyler had no answer. His calls to my parents went straight to voicemail. Even Ryan, when finally reached, seemed uncomfortable and evasive. They're really busy right now, my brother said vaguely. Dad's working on a big investment deal, and Mom's organizing a charity gala. Plus, my finals are coming up. Your sister is in a coma, Tyler said flatly. I know, and it's terrible. But the doctors said there's nothing we can do but wait, right? So we're just waiting. Elsewhere. Meanwhile, Sophia became my primary nurse, developing a special attachment to me despite my unconscious state. She would talk to me during her shifts, brush my hair, and even apply lip balm to my dry lips. My sister was in an accident when we were teenagers, she confided to Tyler once. I know what it's like to wait for someone to wake up. But at least my parents were there every step of the way. I don't understand how hers can stay away. Neither did Tyler. And neither would I, when I finally opened my eyes nearly 3 months after the accident, alone except for the steady beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell of a hospital room that had become my unwitting home. Consciousness returned to me like a slow tide, washing in and receding unpredictably. First came sounds, the mechanical hum of equipment, distant voices, the squeak of rubber-soled shoes on linoleum. Then sensations, the scratch of hospital sheets against my skin, the pinch of an N4 in my arm, the dull ache that seemed to permeate my entire body. Finally, I managed to open my eyes. The fluorescent ceiling lights were blinding. I blinked rapidly, trying to orient myself. White walls, beeping machines, the smell of disinfectant. I was clearly in a hospital, but I had no memory of how I'd gotten there. I tried to speak, but my throat was parched and painful, and all that came out was a hoarse croak. Almost immediately, a woman in scrubs rushed to my side. "Amber? Can you hear me?" I managed a slight nod, wincing at the pain that radiated through my skull with the movement. "I'm Sophia, your nurse. You're at Boston General Hospital. You've been in an accident, and you've been unconscious for quite some time. Try not to move too much. I'm going to call the doctor." She pressed a button, and within minutes, a tall woman with silver-streaked black hair entered the room. "Amber, I'm Dr. Rebecca Stevens, your neurologist. You were in a serious car accident 3 months ago. You've been in a coma since then." 3 months? The information didn't compute. How could I have lost 3 entire months of my life? I tried to speak again, and this time Sophia offered me a small sip of water through a straw. "My parents?" I managed to whisper. A shadow passed over Dr. Stevens' face. "Let's focus on your condition first. You've suffered a traumatic brain injury, along with multiple fractures and internal injuries. The fact that you're awake and seemingly cognizant is extremely encouraging." She continued explaining my medical situation, but I was only half listening. Where were my parents? Why weren't they here for this momentous occasion? And then another thought struck me. "Tyler?" I croaked. At this, Sophia's expression softened. "He was here this morning before his shift. He's been here every day, Amber. Sometimes just for an hour if he's working, but usually longer. He reads to you, talks to you. He's been incredible." Relief washed over me. At least Tyler hadn't abandoned me. But my parents, something was wrong. Over the next few hours, as doctors examined me and ran tests, I pieced together fragments of information. Yes, I had been unconscious for exactly 11 weeks and 4 days. Yes, Tyler had indeed visited daily, often bringing fresh flowers or small gifts that now cluttered my windowsill. And no, my parents hadn't been to see me in nearly 3 months. "They came the first few days after your accident," Sophia explained gently when we were alone. "But then they just stopped coming. Tyler tried to contact them repeatedly." The pain of this revelation was worse than any physical injury. My own parents had abandoned me when I needed them most. I couldn't comprehend it. Later that day, Tyler arrived, his firefighter uniform still on, clearly having rushed straight from his shift. When he saw me awake, he froze in the doorway, his eyes filling with tears. "Amber," he whispered, and then he was at my bedside, carefully taking my hand in his, pressing it to his lips. "You're back. You're finally back." I tried to smile, though it felt strange on my face, as if those muscles had forgotten their purpose. "How long have you been waiting?" 83 days, he answered without hesitation. And I would have waited 83 more. Tyler filled in more details about my time unconscious. He'd taken extra shifts to help with expenses, working himself to exhaustion between the firehouse and the hospital. He'd brought books to read to me, my favorites, like Pride and Prejudice and The Bell Jar, as well as firefighting manuals when he ran out of material. The doctor said familiar voices might help, he explained. So I just kept talking, even when I ran out of things to say. He'd also kept a journal of his daily visits, which he somewhat shyly showed me. Each entry began with "Good morning, beautiful" or "Hello, sunshine," the way he'd greeted me every day when I couldn't respond. He'd documented small changes in my condition, one-sided conversations he'd had with me, and his unwavering belief that I would eventually wake up. May 14th, I read aloud, my voice still raspy. Amber moved her fingers today when I held her hand. The nurse said it might be just a reflex, but I choose to believe she knows I'm here. I told her about the new puppy at the firehouse, a Dalmatian, naturally. The guys named him Spot, which lacks originality but suits him. I promised Amber that when she wakes up, I'll bring him to meet her. I know how much she loves dogs. Tears streamed down my face. You never gave up on me. Never, Tyler affirmed. Not for a single moment. When I finally asked about my parents, Tyler's expression darkened. I tried, Amber. I called them every day at first, then every week. They always had excuses. They were busy with work, with Ryan's education, with social obligations. Eventually, they stopped taking my calls altogether. Have they even asked about me? Tyler hesitated. The hospital has kept them informed about your condition, as required. But no, they haven't called to ask for updates. The betrayal cut deep. These were the people who had raised me, who had once proudly showcased my achievements. How could they abandon me so completely? My suspicions about their true reasons for staying away were confirmed a week later when I received an email, not even a phone call, from my father's lawyer. It was coldly professional, inquiring about my insurance coverage and expressing concern about mounting medical expenses. Not a word about my recovery, my well-being, or when they might visit. We have been informed of your improved condition, the email read, and wish to address the outstanding financial matters related to your extended hospitalization. Your parents are understandably concerned about potential liability. Understandably concerned. About liability. Not about their daughter who had nearly died and spent 3 months in a coma. I showed the email to Tyler, who read it with growing indignation. This is unbelievable, he said. They're worried about money when they should be celebrating that you're alive. The physical therapist assigned to my case, a no-nonsense woman named Darlene, became my rock during those early days of recovery. You can cry about your parents for 5 minutes at the beginning of each session, she told me. Then we work. Channel that hurt into getting stronger. And I did. Every painful step, every trembling attempt to rebuild my atrophied muscles, was fueled by a combination of determination and heartbreak. When my hands shook too badly to hold a spoon, I pictured my parents at their country club, calmly sipping cocktails while I struggled. When my legs buckled during walking exercises, I imagined striding confidently into a courtroom to face them. Because that's what I had decided to do. If my parents had abandoned me financially as well as emotionally, then I would seek legal recourse. Not just for the money, though the medical bills were indeed staggering, but for the principle. For the accountability they had evaded. Sophia introduced me to a hospital social worker, who connected me with Marcus Wilson, an attorney specializing in family law and medical cases. He visited me in my hospital room, listening intently as I explained my situation. I want to be clear, he said after I finished. You're considering suing your own parents for abandonment and financial negligence during your medical crisis? Yes, I said firmly. They left me alone when I needed them most. They blocked hospital calls. And now they're trying to dodge financial responsibility, even though I know they have the means to help. My father is an investment banker. My mother comes from old money. They just bought my brother a new BMW for his birthday last month, I saw it on his Instagram. Marcus nodded thoughtfully. It won't be easy, emotionally or legally. But from what you've told me, you have a case. Massachusetts has filial responsibility laws, and there's the matter of your trust fund. What trust fund? You mentioned your grandmother left you money for education and emergencies. Yes, but I used that for college. It should be empty now. Marcus made a note. We'll need to investigate that. If the trust still exists and your parents have control over it, that could be significant to our case. As my physical recovery progressed, so did our legal preparations. I graduated from liquid diets to solid foods, from a wheelchair to a walker, and finally to cautious steps with a cane. Each milestone was celebrated by the hospital staff who had become my surrogate family and by Tyler, whose unwavering support gave me strength I didn't know I possessed. On a bright spring morning, 6 weeks after I'd awakened, Tyler knelt beside my hospital bed, holding a small velvet box. "This isn't how I planned to do this," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I had this whole romantic weekend mapped out for our anniversary. But these last months have taught me that life is unpredictable and precious. I don't want to wait another day to ask you to be my wife." He opened the box to reveal a simple but beautiful diamond ring. "Amber Mitchell, will you marry me?" Through tears, I nodded. "Yes. 1,000 times yes." As Tyler slipped the ring onto my finger, I felt a strange combination of joy and sorrow. The happiest moment of my life was taking place in a hospital room, with no family to share it with. But looking at Tyler's face, alight with love and hope, I realized something profound: family isn't always defined by blood. Sometimes it's defined by who stays when everyone else leaves. That night, I received another email from my parents' lawyer. This one informed me that my parents had withdrawn all access to the family trust that I hadn't known still existed, a trust that could have easily covered my medical expenses. The reason cited was concerns about the beneficiary's judgment and associations. The next morning, I asked Marcus to file the lawsuit. The fluorescent lights of Marcus Wilson's downtown law office cast harsh shadows across the conference table where we sat reviewing documents. It was my first trip outside the hospital grounds in almost 5 months, and despite the somber purpose, I felt a strange exhilaration at simply being in a different building. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this?" Marcus asked, his experienced eyes studying my face for any sign of hesitation. "Suing your parents will make reconciliation much more difficult, if not impossible." I looked down at the stack of medical bills before me, hundreds of thousands of dollars in treatments, surgeries, medications, and therapy sessions. Insurance had covered a significant portion, but the remaining balance was still staggering. Next to the bills sat copies of my parents' financial statements, which Marcus's investigator had obtained. Their combined assets exceeded $8 million, not including properties. "They left me to die alone," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "And now they're trying to saddle me with debt that would take decades to repay, when they could easily help. What kind of reconciliation would be possible with people who value their money over their daughter's life?" Marcus nodded, accepting my decision. "Then let's discuss strategy. Our strongest claim is accessing the Mitchell Family Trust. Your grandmother established it for both educational and medical emergencies for her grandchildren. You and Ryan are the sole beneficiaries. I thought that money was gone after college." "No. The educational portion was just one component. There's still approximately $1.2 million in the trust, specifically earmarked for medical emergencies. Your parents, as trustees, have a fiduciary duty to release those funds for your care. Instead, they've not only withheld access but have been actively redirecting funds to Ryan's medical school expenses, which is a clear violation of the trust terms." My head spun at this revelation. All those months of financial stress, the threatening letters from billing departments, the sleepless nights worrying about bankruptcy, and there had been money available all along. Money that was legally mine. Why would they do this? I asked, more to myself than to Marcus. That's what discovery will help us determine. But based on the emails and financial transfers we've uncovered, it appears your parents have been systematically favoring your brother for years. The legal process moved forward with methodical precision. Marcus filed the initial complaint, and my parents responded through their high-powered law firm, Blackwell and Reed, denying all allegations and countering that I had been financially irresponsible and emotionally unstable prior to my accident. These accusations stung, but they were also transparently false. My financial records showed a history of prudent saving and investing, habits my father himself had instilled in me. My professional evaluations at work were exemplary. There was no evidence whatsoever of emotional instability. They're grasping at straws, Marcus reassured me. But be prepared, this will get uglier before it's resolved. He was right. The discovery phase revealed disturbing patterns in my parents' behavior. They had told extended family members that I was recovering at an exclusive private facility in Switzerland, a complete fabrication to explain my absence from family functions. They had liquidated my childhood bedroom, donating my remaining possessions to charity. Most damning of all, they had consulted an attorney about legally declaring me incapacitated to gain complete control over my finances, including my retirement accounts and investments. They were planning to take everything, I whispered, looking at the consultation notes Marcus had obtained through discovery. While I was fighting to survive, they were plotting to strip me of what little I had left. Tyler, who had taken the day off to accompany me to this meeting, placed his hand over mine. But they failed. You survived. You're fighting back. The media caught wind of the case, a young woman suing her wealthy parents for abandonment during a medical crisis made for compelling headlines. Local news stations reached out for interviews, which Marcus advised against while the case was pending. Still, public opinion seemed largely on my side, especially after a journalist uncovered that my parents had taken a luxury cruise to the Mediterranean during my second month in a coma. Mitchell family cruises while daughter lies comatose, read one particularly damning headline. The case's high profile attracted attention from patient advocacy groups, who reached out to offer support. One organization, Patients First, even offered to file an amicus brief supporting my claim. Their attorney, a passionate woman named Jessica Lawson, met with us to discuss the broader implications of the case. What happened to you isn't as rare as people think, she explained. Family abandonment during major medical crises occurs frequently, especially when significant money is involved. Your case could set an important precedent for protecting vulnerable patients. As the court date approached, my anxiety mounted. I hadn't seen my parents since before the accident, and the prospect of facing them in court was both terrifying and necessary. Tyler suggested we drive by the family home in Wellesley the weekend before the trial, perhaps as a way to prepare myself emotionally. The large Tudor house looked exactly as I remembered it, manicured lawn, gleaming windows, tasteful seasonal decorations adorning the front door. It was strange how something could appear so unchanged on the outside while everything about my relationship with the people inside had been irrevocably altered. As we sat parked across the street, I noticed movement at an upstairs window, my mother, peering out through a gap in the curtains. Our eyes met briefly before she let the fabric fall back into place. She didn't wave. She didn't come out. She simply retreated further into the fortress they had built against me. She saw me, I said quietly. Tyler squeezed my hand. Are you okay? I considered the question carefully. Was I okay? My body was healing, though I still walked with a slight limp and suffered occasional headaches. My heart was bruised but beating, sustained by the love of the man beside me and the makeshift family of healthcare workers and legal advocates who had rallied around me. And my spirit, against all odds, remained unbroken. I'm better than okay, I finally answered. I'm ready. The evening before the trial, Tyler surprised me with dinner at our apartment, the first real home-cooked meal I'd had since before the accident. He'd decorated the table with candles and fresh flowers, and prepared my favorite pasta dish, following a recipe he'd found in my collection. Tomorrow will be hard, he said, filling my wine glass with a small amount of Cabernet, all I was allowed with my medications. But whatever happens, we'll face it together. And afterward, we can start planning our wedding. Something small, intimate. Just people who truly care about us. I raised my glass to his. To chosen family. To chosen family, he echoed. And to new beginnings. That night, as I laid awake rehearsing what I might say if given the chance to address my parents directly, I realized that regardless of the legal outcome, I had already won something precious, the knowledge of who truly loved me, and the freedom to build a life surrounded only by those who had earned a place in it. Morning arrived with a knot of anticipation in my stomach. I dressed carefully in a conservative navy blue suit that Marcus had advised would project both professionalism and vulnerability, the successful young executive whose life had been derailed through no fault of her own. As Tyler and I approached the courthouse, I was surprised by the small crowd gathered outside, former colleagues, neighbors, even my high school English teacher who had read about the case in the newspaper. They formed a pathway, offering words of encouragement as we walked through. "We're with you, Amber. Stay strong. You deserve justice." Their support brought tears to my eyes, but I blinked them back. Today wasn't about emotion, it was about accountability. And as we pushed through the heavy wooden doors of the courthouse, I steeled myself for the confrontation that awaited inside. Suffolk County Courthouse stood imposing against the clear blue sky, its granite facade a testament to the gravity of the proceedings that took place within its walls. I gripped Tyler's arm for support as we climbed the wide steps, my legs still not entirely trustworthy after months of atrophy and rehabilitation. Marcus met us in the lobby, his normally calm demeanor charged with the focused energy of a lawyer prepared for battle. "Remember what we discussed," he said quietly. "Answer questions directly, don't let their attorneys provoke an emotional response, and look at the judge when you speak." We entered courtroom 3C, where Judge Eleanor Hammond presided. The room was more crowded than I'd expected. Apparently, our case had drawn significant public interest. Journalists occupied the back row, notebooks ready. Patient advocates sat clustered together on one side. And there, at the defendant's table, sat my parents. Seeing them for the first time in over 5 months hit me with unexpected force. My mother looked thinner, her typically perfect makeup applied with slightly less precision. My father's posture was rigid, his jaw set in the stubborn expression I'd known since childhood. Neither looked in my direction as we took our seats. Their legal team consisted of 3 attorneys from Blackwell and Reed, led by senior partner Gerald Blackwell himself, a sign of how seriously they were taking this case. The $1,000 suits and leather briefcases conveyed their message clearly. They were prepared to overwhelm us with legal firepower. Judge Hammond called the court to order, her stern gaze sweeping the room. "Mitchell versus Mitchell," she announced. Unusual to see family members on opposing sides of my courtroom, but the law applies equally regardless of relation. The opening statements began with Marcus outlining our case with compelling clarity. "Your Honor, this case is about parental abandonment during a medical crisis and breach of fiduciary duty regarding a trust specifically established for medical emergencies. When Amber Mitchell lay fighting for her life after a catastrophic car accident, her parents, who possess considerable financial resources, not only abandoned her physically and emotionally but actively worked to prevent her access to funds legally designated for exactly such emergencies." Gerald Blackwell countered with a portrayal of my parents as concerned but pragmatic individuals who had made difficult decisions under stressful circumstances. "The Mitchell Family Trust was established with specific parameters for its use," he argued smoothly. "Mr. and Mrs. Mitchell, as trustees, have a responsibility to ensure funds are distributed appropriately and not exhausted by what they reasonably believed might be a prolonged vegetative state requiring decades of care." I flinched at the phrase vegetative state, and Tyler's hand tightened around mine. The evidence presentation began with hospital records documenting my parents' brief initial visits and subsequent absence. Nurses testified about Tyler's daily presence and my parents' conspicuous absence. Financial experts detailed the trust specifications, clearly demonstrating that my medical emergency qualified for fund distribution. Most damning was the testimony from the hospital administrator who had spoken with my father about transferring me to a less expensive facility, just 2 weeks after my accident, when my prognosis was still uncertain. Mr. Mitchell specifically asked about minimum care requirements and whether insurance would cover a basic care facility instead of the specialized neurological unit, the administrator testified. When I explained that such a transfer might compromise his daughter's chances of recovery, he said they needed to be realistic about outcomes and fiscally responsible. Throughout this testimony, my parents sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to their attorneys but never looking in my direction. Their strategy became clear as their witnesses took the stand. They would portray themselves as rational actors making difficult financial decisions while I was portrayed as financially irresponsible and overly emotional. Amber has always been impulsive with money, my mother testified, finally addressing me directly with a look of practiced concern. We were simply trying to protect her resources for what might have been a very long-term care situation. This was blatantly false. My financial records clearly showed responsible management of my money, including regular retirement contributions and modest living expenses well below my means. When my father took the stand, he doubled down on the narrative. "We love our daughter," he said, his voice steady but his eyes fixed somewhere above my head. "But love doesn't pay medical bills. We were acting in her best long-term interest by withdrawing access to a trust specifically designated for medical emergencies?" Marcus countered during cross-examination. "By preserving resources that might have been needed for years or decades of care," my father replied smoothly. "No one could tell us if she would ever wake up. And yet her boyfriend managed to visit daily for 3 months, while you and your wife were photographed on a Mediterranean cruise 6 weeks after her accident," Marcus pressed, producing the damning photos that had appeared in the Boston Globe. My father's composure finally cracked. "We had already paid for that trip. And we were reachable by phone if there had been any change in her condition. Were you?" "Hospital records show 17 attempted calls to both your numbers during that 2-week period. None were answered." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The most difficult moment came when my brother Ryan took the stand as a witness for our parents. He looked uncomfortable in his suit, his eyes darting between me and our parents. "Ryan, did you know that the Mitchell Family Trust was being used to pay for your medical education?" Marcus asked. I was told there was a separate educational trust," he stammered. "Were you aware that your sister was in a coma for 3 months?" "Yes, of course." "How many times did you visit her?" Ryan looked down. "Twice, at the beginning. I was studying for important exams." "And did you know that your parents had told family members that Amber was recovering at a private facility in Switzerland?" Ryan's head snapped up. "What? No, I didn't know that." It was the first genuine moment of surprise in his testimony, and it gave me a sliver of hope that perhaps my brother wasn't completely complicit in our parents' deception. By the 3rd day of trial, the weight of evidence against my parents was substantial. Their lawyers tried to pivot to questioning my relationship with Tyler, suggesting he had undue influence over my financial decisions. This backfired spectacularly when hospital records showed he had contributed over $15,000 of his own money toward my medical expenses while working double shifts. As the trial neared its conclusion, Judge Hammond asked if I wished to make a statement to the court. I hadn't planned to speak, but suddenly I knew I needed to. With Marcus's encouraging nod, I made my way slowly to the stand, still using a cane for stability. "Your Honor," I began, my voice stronger than I expected. "This case is about more than money, although the financial burden my parents have tried to place on me would be crushing. It's about what it means to be family." I turned slightly, finally making direct eye contact with my parents. "When I was growing up, you taught me that family meant showing up for each other in times of crisis. You taught me that character is revealed not in easy moments, but in difficult ones. By your own standard, you have failed completely." My mother's eyes filled with tears, but my father's remained coldly defiant. I lay unconscious for 3 months, fighting for my life. The man I'd been dating for less than a year never left my side. Nurses who were strangers became my advocates. But you, the people who gave me life, couldn't be bothered to visit, to call, to care. My voice cracked slightly, but I pushed forward. The trust my grandmother established was meant to protect her grandchildren in exactly this type of emergency. You violated not only your legal duty as trustees but also your moral duty as parents. You chose favoritism, comfort, and money over your daughter's life and well-being. I paused, gathering strength for my final words. Whatever the court decides about the financial aspects of this case, I want the record to show that some betrayals can't be measured in dollars. Some breaches of trust can never be repaired with money alone. As I returned to my seat, I noticed my father's face had gone ashen. My mother was openly weeping now, her carefully applied makeup streaming down her cheeks. But it was what happened next that no one in the courtroom was prepared for. As Judge Hammond began to speak, my father suddenly clutched his chest and slumped forward. My mother cried out, reaching for him as he slid from his chair onto the courtroom floor. Simultaneously, she collapsed beside him, whether from shock or some physical symptom of her own, it wasn't immediately clear. The courtroom erupted in chaos. Medical emergency. Is there a doctor present? The bailiff called out. Instinctively, I rose from my seat, but Tyler gently restrained me. Amber, wait. 2 court officers rushed to my parents' aid, and a woman identifying herself as a nurse pushed forward from the gallery. Judge Hammond banged her gavel repeatedly, calling for order. Court is in recess. Clear the courtroom except for medical personnel. As we filed out, I looked back at my parents, my father now receiving CPR, my mother being helped into a chair, her face blank with shock. Despite everything, I felt a pang of concern. They were still my parents, even if they had failed catastrophically in that role. In the hallway, Marcus conferred with the court officers, then returned to where Tyler and I waited. Your father appears to have had a stress-induced cardiac event, not a full heart attack, they think. Your mother is experiencing what seems to be an anxiety attack. They're both being transported to Massachusetts General. Should we go? I asked, genuinely uncertain about the right course of action. Marcus looked at me sympathetically. That's entirely your decision, Amber. Legally, this changes nothing about our case. Personally. He hesitated. Sometimes a crisis reveals truth in ways arguments never can. Tyler squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, I'm with you. I stood in that courthouse hallway, balanced between my past and my future, between justified anger and lingering love, between justice and mercy. The decision I made in that moment would define not just the outcome of the case, but the person I was choosing to become in the aftermath of betrayal. I want to check on them, I finally said. Not to reconcile, not yet. But I need to know they're okay. Tyler nodded, understanding as always. Let's go. As we headed toward the hospital, my second home for so many months, I realized that my parents' physical collapse in the courtroom was, in its way, an acknowledgement of the truth more powerful than any verdict could have been. They had fallen under the weight of their own actions, confronted at last by the consequences of choices they could no longer justify or deny. Judge Hammond would rule on our case the following week. But in that moment, walking toward rather than away from the people who had hurt me most deeply, I had already claimed a different kind of victory, the freedom to choose compassion without surrendering my worth, and the knowledge that true strength lies not in hardening your heart, but in refusing to let others' failings determine who you become. The headline in the Boston Globe read, "Parents Collapse as Daughter Testifies About Abandonment During Coma." The accompanying photo, captured by a courtroom sketch artist, showed my father slumped over the defendant's table while my mother reached for him in distress. In the background, I stood with my cane, my expression a complex mixture of shock, concern, and resolute dignity. Within hours, the image had gone viral. Local news coverage expanded to national outlets, and suddenly our private family trauma became fodder for morning talk shows and social media debates. Hashtags like and trended on Twitter. Medical advocacy groups cited our case in fundraising campaigns. "How are you handling all this attention?" Sophia asked during her visit to my apartment the day after court recessed. She had remained a close friend even after I left the hospital. "It's surreal," I admitted. Yesterday I got an email from a producer at Good Morning America wanting me to come on the show. Are you going to do it? I shook my head. Marcus advised against any media appearances until after the judge's ruling. Besides, this isn't about publicity for me. It's about accountability. The truth was, the public attention felt both validating and intrusive. Complete strangers were weighing in on my family dynamics, offering opinions on situations they couldn't possibly understand in their full complexity. Some comments were overwhelmingly supportive. This brave young woman represents thousands of patients abandoned by family during health crises. Her courage in seeking justice deserves our respect. Others were surprisingly critical. We're only hearing one side. Parents make tough decisions in impossible situations. The daughter seems ungrateful for their previous support. I tried to avoid reading comments, but it was difficult to escape the conversation that had sprung up around us. Even my physical therapist mentioned seeing me on the news. Meanwhile, my parents were recovering at Massachusetts General Hospital, my father diagnosed with stress cardiomyopathy, commonly known as broken heart syndrome, and my mother treated for severe anxiety. I had visited them briefly that first evening, standing awkwardly at the threshold of my father's hospital room while my mother sat beside his bed. "Amber," my father had said, his voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. "You came. I wanted to make sure you were okay," I replied neutrally. "We never meant." My mother began, then faltered. "It wasn't supposed to be like this." "No," I agreed. "It wasn't. I didn't stay long. There was too much unresolved between us, too many words unsaid on both sides. This wasn't the time or place for the conversation we needed to have, if such a conversation was even possible." 3 days after the courtroom incident, Judge Hammond issued her ruling. Marcus called me immediately. "It's a complete victory, Amber," he said, his typically measured tone giving way to genuine excitement. "The judge has ordered full access to the trust funds for your medical expenses, plus additional damages for breach of fiduciary duty." She was particularly scathing about their redirection of trust funds to Ryan's education while denying your legitimate medical claims. The financial relief was immediate and substantial. The $1.2 million trust would cover all my outstanding medical bills with enough left over to support ongoing therapy and potential future needs related to my injuries. The additional $300,000 in damages would provide a cushion as I slowly returned to work. But more valuable than the money was Judge Hammond's written opinion, which validated the emotional aspect of my case in unexpected ways. The court finds that Richard and Diana Mitchell violated not only their legal obligations as trustees but also the fundamental covenant of parental care. While the law cannot mandate love or presence, it can and does require those who accept the responsibility of managing funds for others' benefit to act with the utmost good faith. The defendants' actions demonstrated a disturbing prioritization of financial considerations over their daughter's well-being during a life-threatening medical crisis. When the ruling became public, the media interest intensified. Patients' rights organizations reached out, asking me to speak at conferences or serve as a spokesperson. Financial advisors offered to help me manage the settlement. Even Hollywood producers inquired about acquiring the rights to my story. Through it all, Tyler remained my anchor, protecting me from unwanted attention and reminding me to focus on my continuing recovery rather than the public narrative. "None of these people know the real you," he said one evening as we sorted through the day's mail, now regularly containing letters from strangers sharing their own stories of family estrangement or medical abandonment. "They see a symbol, but I see the woman I love, complicated, resilient, and so much more than this one chapter of your life." A week after the ruling, I received an unexpected visitor at our apartment. Ryan stood nervously in the hallway, a small potted plant in his hands, an apparent peace offering. "Can I come in?" he asked hesitantly. I hadn't seen my brother since the courtroom, and before that, not since before my accident. We had once been close, in the way that siblings with a 4-year age gap can be, not confidants, but allies in navigating our parents' high expectations. "That depends," I said, not stepping aside immediately. "Are you here as their emissary?" No, I'm here as your brother. Just me. He looked thinner than I remembered, with dark circles under his eyes. I didn't know, Amber. About any of it. Not really. I let him in, and over cups of tea at our kitchen table, Ryan revealed his own version of events. Our parents had told him I was receiving the best care possible but discouraged him from visiting, citing his studies as the priority. They had framed their decisions as necessary protective measures for both of us. They told me the trust was always intended primarily for education, with medical coverage as a secondary purpose, he explained. I had no idea they were actively blocking hospital calls or lying to family about where you were. But you must have wondered why I suddenly disappeared from family events, from your life. Ryan looked down, ashamed. I did. But med school is consuming. And whenever I asked about you, they had plausible explanations. I should have pushed harder, should have gone to see you myself instead of taking their word. He looked up, his eyes wet. I failed you as a brother, and I'm so sorry. His apology felt genuine, and I found myself wanting to rebuild at least this one bridge to my former life. You're here now, I said softly. That's a start. As for my parents, their attempts at reconciliation took a more complicated path. 2 weeks after the ruling, they sent a formal public apology through their attorney, which was picked up by several news outlets. Richard and Diana Mitchell deeply regret their actions regarding their daughter Amber's medical crisis. They acknowledge their failure to provide appropriate emotional and financial support during her time of need and accept the court's judgment in full. They ask for privacy as they work to heal these family wounds. Privately, they sent a handwritten letter that offered more insight but stopped short of taking full responsibility. Amber, we never intended to cause you pain. When the doctors told us you might never wake up, we were devastated and made decisions from a place of fear rather than love. We convinced ourselves we were being practical, protecting resources for what might have been decades of care. We were wrong, and we will regret our choices for the rest of our lives. If you can find it in your heart to allow us any place in your future, we would be grateful for the chance to make amends. The letter was signed Mom and Dad, a presumption of intimacy that felt unearned after all that had happened. Most shocking was what Tyler discovered through a friend at the fire department who knew my parents' neighbor. My parents had apparently been struggling with a secret gambling addiction for years, having lost significant portions of their wealth at casinos in Connecticut and online betting sites. Their abandonment hadn't been just emotional callousness, it had been financially motivated by their own spiraling problems, which they had hidden from everyone, including Ryan. This revelation explained much about their behavior but excused nothing. If anything, it made their actions more disturbing. They had prioritized their addiction over their daughter's life. I shared this information with Marcus, who wasn't entirely surprised. The financial records showed irregular withdrawals and transfers that didn't quite make sense, he noted. Addiction would explain that pattern. As I processed this new information, I focused on the aspects of my life I could control. Tyler and I set a date for a small wedding ceremony the following spring, enough time for me to complete my physical rehabilitation and return to work part-time. Instead of the elaborate event my mother had always envisioned for me, we planned an intimate gathering at a beachside cottage on Cape Cod, surrounded only by people who had proven their love and loyalty. My colleagues at the marketing firm had held my position, allowing me to return gradually with a flexible schedule. My first day back, I was greeted with balloons, cards, and genuine warmth that brought me to tears. The Mitchell women don't cry in public, my mother had always insisted. But I was rewriting those rules now, allowing myself to feel and express emotions that had once been deemed inappropriate. With the settlement money, I established a small foundation called Waking Alone, dedicated to supporting patients without family resources during extended hospitalizations. The foundation would provide not just financial assistance but also emotional support through trained volunteers who would visit, read to, and advocate for isolated patients. I want something positive to come from this experience, I explained to Sophia, who had eagerly agreed to serve on the foundation's board. No one should wake up alone after trauma. 3 months after the trial, When the media attention had finally begun to fade, I received a text from Ryan. Mom and Dad are in treatment for gambling addiction. They're serious about recovery. They've asked if you would consider meeting with them and their therapist. I showed the message to Tyler, who had become protective of my emotional boundaries. Do you want to see them? He asked, careful to keep his tone neutral. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to understand why they did what they did. Another part wonders if any explanation could ever be sufficient. After consulting with my own therapist, whom I'd been seeing to process the trauma of both the accident and the abandonment, I agreed to a single session with my parents and their addiction counselor. The meeting was difficult. My father broke down completely, sobbing as he described how gambling had consumed their lives and warped their judgment. My mother was more composed but equally remorseful. We lost ourselves, she said simply. And in doing so, we nearly lost you in every way possible. I didn't offer forgiveness that day. Some betrayals run too deep for quick absolution. But I did agree to occasional contact under specific conditions. They would continue their treatment, they would respect my boundaries, and they would accept that our relationship would never return to what it had been before. I need time, I told them. Years, maybe. And even then, I can't promise what our relationship will look like. They nodded, seeming to understand that this tentative connection was more than they deserved and perhaps more than they had hoped for. 1 year after waking from my coma, I held a small gathering at our apartment, a rebirthday of sorts. Sophia came, along with other nurses and therapists who had become friends. Marcus attended with his wife. Ryan was there, our relationship slowly healing through careful, honest conversations. Tyler's firefighter colleagues, who had supported him through those grueling months of hospital visits, filled our small living room with their boisterous energy. Notably absent were my parents. They had sent a card, which I appreciated as a sign of their respect for my boundaries, but the wound between us remained too raw for celebration together. As I looked around at the faces of these people who had carried me through the darkest period of my life, I felt a profound sense of gratitude. The accident and its aftermath had stripped away illusions about family obligations and revealed the truth about love, that it shows itself in presence, in sacrifice, in choosing to stay when leaving would be easier. I want to thank all of you, I said, raising my glass in a toast. You taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who walks into the hell you're experiencing and stays until you find your way out. The journey toward physical and emotional healing continued. Some days were harder than others, phantom pains from my injuries, nightmares about waking up alone, lingering trust issues that affected my relationships. But with each passing month, I reclaimed more of myself while integrating the lessons of this difficult chapter. My parents' betrayal had broken something fundamental between us, perhaps irreparably. But it had also cleared space for new connections, new definitions of family, and a deeper understanding of my own resilience. I had lost the parents I thought I had, but found strength I never knew I possessed. And perhaps that, in its way, was its own kind of victory. The beach at Cape Cod shimmered under the afternoon sun, waves gently lapping at the shore as a small group gathered for our wedding ceremony. The breeze carried the scent of salt and roses, ruffling the simple white sundress I had chosen instead of the elaborate gown my mother would have insisted upon in another lifetime. Tyler waited for me at the end of a short aisle of scattered rose petals, his firefighter friend standing beside him as groomsman, his face alight with a joy that reflected my own. Sophia adjusted the small bouquet in my hands before taking her place as my maid of honor. "Ready?" she whispered. I nodded, taking my first steps toward my future husband without a cane or a limp. The physical therapy had finally paid off completely. This walk, unlike so many others in the past year, required no assistance. My body, like my spirit, had healed enough to stand on its own. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt, our vows written to acknowledge the unusual foundation of our marriage, a love tested by catastrophe before it had properly begun. "Tyler," I said, my voice steady despite the emotion behind my words, "you stayed when leaving would have been easier. You saw me at my most vulnerable and found strength to share rather than weakness to exploit. You showed me what love truly means, not in grand gestures, but in daily presence, in unwavering support, in choosing me again and again when others turned away. I promise to love you with that same constancy, that same courage, that same commitment to showing up no matter what challenges we face." His vows to me were equally moving, bringing tears to the eyes of our small gathering of witnesses, those who had earned the right to share this moment through their loyalty during our darkest times. Notably absent were my parents. I had sent them an invitation, a peace offering of sorts, but with clear boundaries attached. They could attend the ceremony but not the reception, could offer congratulations but not participate in traditional parent roles. My mother had declined tearfully over the phone. "We understand," she said. "It's too soon. We respect your decision and wish you both every happiness." It was the first time she had accepted my boundaries without argument, perhaps a sign of growth through her ongoing therapy. Instead, they sent a generous gift and a card expressing hope for a future where reconciliation might be possible. Ryan attended, standing somewhat awkwardly among Tyler's boisterous firefighter friends but making a genuine effort to rebuild our sibling bond. Over the past months, we had established a cautious relationship independent of our parents, meeting for occasional coffees where we carefully navigated the new terrain of our family dynamics. After the ceremony, as guests mingled on the beach house deck, Ryan approached me with a champagne flute and an uncertain smile. "You look beautiful, Amber. Tyler's a lucky man." "Thank you for coming," I said, meaning it. "It means a lot. I've been thinking about what you said last month, about needing to establish our own relationship separate from Mom and Dad." I nodded, remembering our conversation in a quiet cafe, where I had explained that any future connection between us needed to be built on honesty rather than the complicated family mythology our parents had constructed. "I want that too," Ryan continued. "And I want you to know that I've turned down their offer to pay for my final year of medical school. I've taken out loans instead." This surprised me. "Ryan, you don't have to do that. The trust money was partly yours too. It doesn't feel right, not after what happened to you. Besides, it's important to me to make my own way now. To understand what it means to stand on my own, like you've had to do." It was a small gesture, perhaps, but significant in what it represented, his willingness to separate himself from the patterns of favoritism and financial manipulation that had defined our family for so long. The wedding marked not just my union with Tyler, but also the beginning of a new phase in my recovery journey. The physical healing had progressed remarkably well. My neurologist, Dr. Stevens, had called it better than we could have hoped for, with only occasional headaches and minor coordination issues remaining from my traumatic brain injury. The emotional healing, however, remained more complicated. 2 weeks after returning from our honeymoon, a simple week at a lakeside cabin in Vermont, I began trauma therapy with Dr. Lillian Parker, a specialist in family betrayal and medical PTSD. Our sessions often left me emotionally drained but provided essential tools for processing what had happened. "Family estrangement is particularly complex," Dr. Parker explained during one session. "There's a social expectation that blood ties trump all other considerations, that family should be forgiven no matter what. But some betrayals cut too deep for simple forgiveness, and acknowledging that reality isn't failure. It's honesty." Through therapy, I came to understand that the clean narrative arc I had craved, complete healing, perfect resolution, tidy reconciliation, was rarely possible in real life. Instead, healing looked more like a spiral, moving generally upward but circling back through difficult emotions repeatedly as I integrated my experiences. The settlement money from the lawsuit provided financial security during this healing process, allowing me flexibility in returning to work. Rather than rushing back full-time to my marketing position, I began consulting part-time while focusing on establishing the Waking Alone Foundation. What had started as a small idea, supporting patients without family resources, quickly grew into something more substantial. Hospital social workers began referring isolated patients to our volunteer program. Medical centers reached out about implementing our visitor protocols. A local news story about our work went viral, bringing donations and volunteer applications from across the country. You've turned your pain into purpose, Sophia remarked during one of our foundation board meetings. That's incredibly rare. 6 months after our wedding, I received an unexpected phone call from my father. Our communication had been limited to occasional text messages and the brief, awkward meeting with their addiction counselor. His voice sounded different, humbler, less certain of his place in the world. "Amber, I'm calling because I saw the news piece about your foundation," he said. I'm proud of what you're doing." The words hung between us, weighted with all the history of his previous pride and its conditional nature. "Thank you," I replied, unsure what else to say. "Your mother and I have been in treatment for almost a year now. Our counselor suggested that part of recovery is making concrete amends, not just apologies." He paused. "We'd like to make a donation to your foundation. An anonymous one, if you prefer. No strings attached, no recognition expected." It was the first offer they had made that didn't feel like an attempt to buy their way back into my life. Still, I hesitated. "I need to think about it," I told him honestly. "It's not about the money. It's about what it means for both of us." "I understand," he said, and perhaps for the first time, he truly did. "Take all the time you need. We'll respect whatever decision you make." After discussing it with Tyler and my therapist, I eventually accepted their donation, anonymous as suggested, and directed specifically toward a new program for family counseling for patients facing long-term hospitalization. It felt like an appropriate use of their money, addressing directly the type of family breakdown we had experienced. As the one-year anniversary of my awakening from the coma approached, Tyler suggested we host a gathering, not to dwell on the trauma, but to celebrate the journey since. "It's your rebirthday," he said with a smile. "A chance to acknowledge how far you've come and thank the people who helped you get here." The small gathering in our apartment became a milestone in my recovery journey. Looking around at the faces of those who had supported me, Sophia and other nurses, Dr. Stevens, Marcus, Ryan, Tyler's firefighter colleagues, I felt a profound sense of gratitude alongside the lingering grief. "A year ago, I woke up alone in a hospital room," I said, raising my glass in a toast. Except I wasn't really alone. I had all of you, some I knew, some I hadn't met yet, but all of you chose to show up in ways my own parents couldn't. You taught me that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about who walks into the hell you're experiencing and stays until you find your way out. The foundation continued to grow, eventually partnering with hospitals across Massachusetts to ensure that no patient faced prolonged hospitalization without support. I began speaking at medical conferences about patient advocacy and family estrangement, using my story to highlight systemic issues in patient care. My relationship with my parents evolved slowly, painfully, with careful boundaries maintained on all sides. We would never return to the false closeness of my childhood, but we established a new, more honest connection based on who we actually were rather than who we had pretended to be. The first time I invited them to dinner at our apartment, a full 18 months after the court case, was tense but necessary. Tyler, ever protective, watched them carefully as they awkwardly admired our home. "Your foundation is doing remarkable work," my mother said, clearly having researched it thoroughly. "The hospital visitation program it's what we should have done for you." "Yes," I agreed simply, neither absolving nor condemning. It was. That dinner marked the beginning of a carefully negotiated relationship, not close, not easy, but existing. They continued their gambling addiction treatment, demonstrating a commitment to change that, while not erasing the past, at least suggested the possibility of a different future. With Ryan, the healing came more naturally. Free from our parents' comparative dynamics, we discovered we actually liked each other as adults. He focused his medical career on neurology, inspired partly by my experience, and occasionally consulted with the foundation on patient care protocols. Tyler and I eventually bought a small house in a suburb halfway between the city and the coast, with a garden I tended as part of my ongoing therapy and a spare room we didn't rush to turn into a nursery despite my mother's hints. We were taking our time, building our life together at our own pace, free from others' expectations. 2 years after waking from the coma, I sat on our back porch watching the sunset, reflecting on all that had happened. The betrayal still hurt, it likely always would. But around that pain, I had built a life rich with authentic connections, meaningful work, and hard-won wisdom about what truly matters. The accident and abandonment had taught me harsh truths about family, love, and human frailty. It had shown me both the worst and best of what people are capable of, the capacity for betrayal alongside the capacity for extraordinary kindness. It had stripped away illusions and replaced them with something more valuable, the ability to see people as they truly are, to love with open eyes, and to build boundaries based on reality rather than obligation. Most importantly, it had taught me that abandonment doesn't define your worth, how you respond to it does. That resilience isn't about never breaking but about how you reassemble the pieces. That the most profound growth often comes through the most painful experiences. I still carried scars, both physical and emotional. But scars, as my physical therapist had reminded me countless times, are evidence of healing, not just of wounding. They tell the story not just of what happened to you, but of how you survived it. As the sky deepened to purple, Tyler joined me on the porch, wrapping a blanket around both our shoulders against the evening chill. We sat in comfortable silence, two people who had seen each other at our worst and chosen each other anyway. "What are you thinking about?" he asked finally. "Everything." "Nothing," I smiled. "Just how strange life is, how the worst thing that ever happened to me led to some of the best things too. Not in a everything happens for a reason way, but in how we create meaning from chaos." He nodded, understanding as always. "You know what I think? I think some people go their whole lives without learning what you learned in those months, who truly loves them, what really matters, how strong they actually are." "A high price for wisdom," I mused. "The highest," he agreed. "But watching you rebuild your life, seeing how you've helped others through the foundation. I'm in awe of you, Amber Mitchell Reynolds." As darkness fell around us, I leaned into his embrace, grateful for this shelter I had found not in the family I was born to but in the one I had chosen, and that had chosen me when I needed it most. My journey continues, as all journeys do. There are still difficult days, still moments when the pain of betrayal feels fresh. But there are many more days filled with purpose, with love, with the quiet joy of a life built on truth rather than illusion. And in that balance lies perhaps the most important lesson of all, that healing isn't the absence of pain but the growth that happens alongside it. If you've stayed with me through this story, perhaps you've recognized elements of your own family dynamics, your own struggles with trust and boundaries and belonging. Maybe you too have experienced the painful recognition that those who should love you the most sometimes fail you the most profoundly. If so, I hope my journey offers some small comfort, the knowledge that you're not alone, that healing is possible, and that family can be found in the most unexpected places. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, please consider subscribing to hear more stories of resilience and transformation. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts or your own experiences with family relationships. What does family mean to you? Is it defined by blood or by actions? And as always, your likes and shares help these stories reach others who might need to hear them. Until next time, remember that your worth is never determined by those who leave, but by the strength you find in continuing forward.